That's Debatable is sponsored by MB&G. MB&G is specialists in the esoteric world of vehicle and furniture warranty insurance, delivering quite marvellous customer service, prompt claims payment, and a highly developed understanding of how to deliver these products in a way that is both compliant with the regulations and attractive to customers. To find out more, call Paul Smith, the Managing Director, on 07887 501 441. That's 07887 501 441.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to That's Debatable, the Free Speech Union's weekly podcast. This week, I'm joined by journalist and feminist campaigner Julie Bindel, and also she is the co-host of the Lesbian Project podcast. She has campaigned against violence against women and girls for over 40 years, and she's also one of the first journalists to ever write about trans ideology with her famous article in The Guardian in 2004. And from that point, Julie has been a target for trans activists, being deplatformed from universities, and at one point had a local council deplatform her, and police on one occasion arriving at her door. Speaking to you this week, Julie, following the news from the Met Police that they are going to stop investigating non-crime hate incidents following the mishandling of Graham Linehan's arrest. What was your reaction when you heard the announcement? Were you surprised?
I wasn't surprised, but I don't think that they are being genuine in calling it mishandling. This is what they've been doing to so many people, women mainly, but also men, when they decide to visit them at home or take them to the police station and put them in a cell. But these people aren't famous, or they're not infamous, or they're not public figures. And so it doesn't get out. We just hear about it in our friendship and activist circles. Obviously, because Graham Linehan was famous prior to this war that he involved himself in, and now is infamous in terms of his involvement in it, it clearly went viral because of the presence of officers with guns at the airport. Now, officers at airports do tend to carry guns, but the idea that they needed to send 5 armed officers to arrest somebody for tweets back in April was so shocking when it became public that I think the egg on their face turned into a massive omelette and they couldn't possibly justify it any longer. So I wasn't surprised, but I have been massively surprised at the fact that they've been investigating something that says on the tin that it's
Yeah.
not a crime. Idiots.
And there have been various instances of specifically women, like you were saying, and men who have spoken out against trans ideology. And you often hear the Free Speech Union as well, because I believe it to be the case. The idea that trans activists have the police in their palm. What is the evidence for that? Because I think that some people may hear that and they may not be aware of the specific cases, and they may think it sounds like a conspiracy because it's
Mm.
so unbelievable that such a small group of campaigners or advocates could possibly control the British police.
It's definitely not a conspiracy. It is, however, true that the police are kowtowing, capitulating to these bullies all over the place. It started with Stonewall training, where Stonewall presented the law as they wished to see it rather than what the law actually was, now thankfully clarified and confirmed by the Supreme Court ruling. But it reminded me, you ask how and why, has this group instilled so much fear and manages to be so effective up until recently with getting everyone to do their bidding? It reminded me of a time back in the 1980s when, as a young feminist campaigner, where we were focusing in our organisations, in our activism, on domestic violence, which obviously is largely perpetrated by men against women, and a group of men's rights activists. There were 3 or 4 groups at the time, Fathers for Justice, Families Need Fathers, Mankind, various types, some of whom were perfectly decent men, I'm sure, that had been treated unfairly by the family courts, but in the main, bitter, angry misogynists who managed to get the ear of government ministers, spads, policymakers, and politicians in general, and convinced them that women perpetrate domestic violence towards men at an equal or even greater rate than men towards women. A refuge for men escaping domestic violence from women was opened. The bed was never slept in. Um, because, of course, men don't need refuges. Even those that have been hit by their female partners, they just get out of the relationship. There's plenty of support for them. And yet they contributed to policy documents to a degree where statistics were skewed, where services and focus started going on men as victims of women, where the language was desexed in that it was people who were being horrible and violent to other people. And they managed to do that because they're a group of male bullies. Now, the difference with this lot, the male bullies that identify as transgender, is that the liberals have all come on board. The idiot be kind brigade. And those liberals back in the day that I've just described would never have supported violent men arguing that women should lose custody of their children because of their angry bitterness. But for some reason, they've been stupid enough with the trans activist wing of the men's rights movement to think that this is all about kindness and inclusivity.
And on that point, and I was looking at the occasions where you've been deplatformed from universities, and am I right in saying, this was going back as early, that may even been early, but the earliest one that I found was 2015,
Oh no,
University of
way
Manchester.
earlier.
So far
No,
earlier
way
than
earlier. Way earlier than that. So back in, I think it was 2008, yeah, 2008 or 9, um, I was deplatformed. I was no platformed actually in general by the National Union of Students. And I was told that I could not ever share a platform with any NUS member at a university, which effectively put all of the women's um, events against male violence and feminism in general out for me, because these women organising on campuses needed the support, financial and otherwise, of the NUS back in those days. And the women's officer at the time of the NUS was a particularly vicious trans activist, and she now has a junior ministerial post in our government, Olivia Bailey. And she added me to a list of 5 groups of fascists. Of fascists. I became the only individual that was no platform by the NUS alongside these really vicious, violent fascist groups. And so that set in stone how dangerous I was. And from then, I was always, if I was allowed on campus because I was invited by academic staff as opposed to some of the feminist student groups, I was picketed, harassed, followed around campus, screamed at, the talks were disrupted. But usually I wouldn't be invited because they didn't want the trouble and the hassle that would inevitably come. So it was way back from 2008 9 that started to happen.
I wanted to ask what you think about their motives for deplatforming or no platforming, because, like you say, the origins, or one an example would be the outright men's rights activist groups like Justice for Fathers, but how the liberals jumped on as soon as those men said they were women. Suddenly everyone who called themselves liberal and progressive jumped on board with them. But from my experience, but then obviously I only left university a few months ago, it's the women who are doing the deplatforming. Do you think that was that the case back in 2008? Was it women who'd been captured? And do you think that they have a genuine fear that what you're saying is harmful, or do you think, they have been corrupted by, and there are essentially strings behind them from these men, who otherwise in later life maybe a Lindsay Watson who tries to uh, coerce the police into taking action against people he doesn't like? Are these young women genuinely convinced that to talk about the reality of biological sex is a dangerous thing, or have are they being pulled by strings by men who say that they're women?
Well, it's a very good question. And 20 years ago, I would have said that largely in the main, those women are doing men's bidding, that they are being manipulated by puppeteers, and that this is something that men are solidly, that the men are directing the behavior. There is still a little bit of that, but largely I think the women aren't just handmaidens or foot soldiers anymore. They are the key instigators. And of course, it benefits men. Uh, of course, for example, the sex trade benefits men, but you see woman after woman after woman standing up and saying sex work is work, it's liberating, pole dancing and stripping is empowering. But it benefits men, and that's really important for us to recognize and look at. But the reason why I think that these women are more agents of their own behavior in recent years is that it suits them to dismiss feminism, to hate feminism, therefore to hate feminists, because it reminds them very, very forcefully of the position that they're in as women in this porn soaked misogynistic world. And so they have two choices. Now, one is a very hard path to take, but without question the better one, which is to say, okay, I'm going to stand up and risk being called a pearl clutching prude, a sexless, um, unfuckable woman that men don't like. And I'm going to pursue feminism and I'm going to pursue my own rights, however you phrase it. You don't need to call yourself a feminist, obviously, to pursue women's rights and to not be a doormat. But that is a hard path because what you've got to accept then, and I'm talking about women in this particular world, middle class university students in the main, that you've then got to accept that men won't like you. That if you are an out and out critic of all of the things that benefit men, whether it's the surrogacy trade, prostitution, trans ideology, then you are definitely unpopular. And the other path, of course, is a far easier one, but a much more dangerous one, in my view, which is to say, hey, I love choking in sex. I love anal sex. I love my trans women friends. Of course, some women can have penises. I'm a lesbian, but I don't mind at all dating trans women. All of those things are going to get them brownie points and are going to, in the short term, mean that they're popular. But it will soon, bite them on the backside because this is pure misogyny that they are going along with and buying into. So the women that are very actively coming for women like me, I suppose because I'm an older feminist, they all hate their mums, and some of the stuff that I get from young men in particular outside universities sounds like they're just screaming at their mum for telling them to tidy their room, and literally viciously ageist and misogynistic, shouting about old white women. And it's just the culture that has been created around universities and other very privileged settings that these young women go along with.
Mm. I noticed in one of the articles about the Manchester incident in 2015, and it said in the article in the Independent, I think, explaining her decision to withdraw from the debate because you received so many death and horrible threats that you decided not to go. Bindel told student newspaper, I apologise for the tone in that article, referring to the Guardian article in 2004, because I made really inappropriate jokes. I apologise, but obviously that wasn't good enough as I've been made a scapegoat. And I was wondering, would you have apologised now? because when I first read your Guardian article, it was after I had peaked, and there was nothing that you said in there that made me think, wow, that really was, even by my own standards, that was really sort of going all in. How do you feel about that now? The fact that essentially you apologized to for your tone.
Oh, I absolutely wouldn't apologise now.
Mm.
And I wish I hadn't then. I was under an immense amount of pressure. This was before the movement against this crazy, vicious ideology was off the ground. I felt very alone. I felt really quite close to the edge, not being able to cope with doing the work that I was trying to do on violence against women, but being prevented from doing it by being no platformed and being heckled and screamed at all over. And there was a time, and it was thankfully a short period of time, because this has been 21 years for me now, where I did try to meet with trans activists, talk to them, try to find some middle ground with them, apologize for my tone so I could still own the sentiments, of course, because that would have been a step too far. And it was massively ineffective. And also, I think quite unfairly and a bit cruelly used against me by those that came into the battle when it was a movement as opposed to individuals that were being hounded. So, no, I wouldn't apologise for that at all. And in fact, that Guardian article, I would have gone much further. Well, I have gone much further since, but never to be cruel, and I never ever mock people's appearances or that kind of thing that I think is a cheap shot. You know, we all have our line in the sand. But what a lot of people don't know is that a year before that Guardian article, well, in fact, it was just a few months. It was towards the end of 2003, and the Guardian article came out in January 2004. I wrote a piece for the Telegraph magazine on transsexuality, and it didn't go online because the magazine at that time didn't. In fact, the Guardian article was one of the first to go online in the new wave of being able to add website to add content from supplements to the website. And the Telegraph piece was, it's an interesting one because I interviewed a trans identified man, Claudia, who I've remained friends with, who was failed by the medical profession and pushed through transition when they really should have recognised that this was an unhappy gay man who was under immense pressure to transition. I also interviewed a trans identified man, Jenny, who ran a bookshop in York, who was very supportive of feminists, as was Claudia. These weren't vicious misogynists. And I reported on this absolute madness that I encountered in what used to be a chain of stores called Transformations, and it's now mainly online, I think. There was one in Euston where cross dressing men, who we now understand as autogynephiliacs, could go along and get dressed by actual women in all kinds of pervy outfits, whether it's a bridal outfit or a maid's outfit or a female police officer's outfit, and they had massive shoes and all these accessories, including rubber vaginas, so men could sit down to go to the loo, and even pills to make them experience some of the symptoms of postmenstrual menstrual tension. It was bonkers. And so I did this whole quite a long piece on the madness of the diagnoses of transsexuality and how this is becoming further entrenched. I had thought decades ago it had gone away because I'd seen it around in the 80s a bit. But that wasn't the thing that got me cancelled. So I really should make more of that article. I think I'll probably post it again.
Do you have any hope for? So, I mean, even after this Maya Forstatter's judgment in 2021, that it was after that Nottingham Council banned you from giving a talk, because they said that your values didn't align with their EDI policy. Um,
That was true.
yeah. Do you have any hope that institutions, and specifically now the police, have learnt their lesson? Or do you think that things are still going to have to get worse? Because I do think there's a difference between England and Scotland. Obviously, Scotland's hate speech laws have one of the protected characteristics is the trans status, whereas we don't have that in England. It's just race, religion, and sexual orientation. They have trans status. Um, do you have any predictions about how things are going to go? And we've also just seen, shout out to Maeve, Thea, and Serena at the University of Cambridge, who've just set up the first actually single sex society for women at the University of Cambridge. And at the moment, at the time of recording, they have simply posted two separate posts on Instagram explaining how to join and what their goals are as a society. And the amount of abuse they've faced, they haven't even said what they're going to be campaigning on other than single sex causes. And within that, I'm sure there'll be a variety of women's issues because it's about women. Um, Julie, what do you see? How do you ever see universities restoring to what they should be? And how do we go about? I remember asking you this question a year ago at the Bus of Ideas, actually, and it's such an open ended question. And it's quite hard to know the answer. I don't think I'll ever really know the answer. So there's universities. What do we do about that? What are your predictions for universities? And do you think that the police and councils have learnt their lessons, or does it have to get worse again before it gets better?
I don't know if it'll get worse again, although trans activists are becoming more and more vicious. And when we saw the attack on the Brighton Centre at the Filia annual feminist conference earlier this month, or in October, wherever we are now, I did, for the first time, fear that they were going to do some actual serious harm to individual women. I think that many of them have become unhinged because
Mm.
the ground has shifted, and they were so used to getting everything that they wanted that they would make demands and instantly it would be theirs. And a bit like a dangerous version of a toddler whose parent doesn't let them have any more sweets. They've gone bonkers. So I think that we need to be very wary of the danger to women. And the police and others, local authorities, social services, and the like, have got a long way to go. But the main thing is the disentanglement from Stonewall, from their protection racket, where they obviously completely indoctrinated them all with the Stonewall law. So that's really important. Things are shifting in the right direction, but we absolutely have to take more and more and more cases, as many as we can, each time that we see the law being flouted or not upheld, each time we see direct discrimination towards those that are being hounded out of college courses or jobs or wherever for expressing their not just perfectly legal point of view, but necessary. I mean, I think it's very necessary. I think we have a duty, all of us, to keep repeating that trans women are men and that single sex spaces are essential. And in terms of universities, I see, I mean, I have a fellowship at Reading University, and that they have a great supportive senior management network, and I think that's a good example of how universities should be run. There are other examples I know, and I've done talks more recently at some universities that 5 years ago absolutely would have been not allowed to go ahead, even though these talks are always picketed by WASOCs. But in a sense, I think I agree pretty much with Barry Weiss, the Free Press, when she said some institutions are just rotten to the core and we need to raise them to the ground and build them back up again. So I think that's where I'm at with universities.
Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Julie Bindel. Please like and subscribe for more interviews with your favourite free speech advocates. And one last reminder that the Freshers offer for membership, which is half price, ends on the 31st of October. So get in there quickly if you are a first year university student or know a first year university student who would love a membership with the Free Speech Union.